In 1982, the town of Hollow Creek, tucked deep into the Appalachian Mountains, had fewer than 200 residents. Life followed an unchanging rhythm shaped by coal shifts, Sunday church, and family names that had carried weight for generations. At the center of this story was Eleanor Ellie Walker, and 27 years old. Ellie was born and raised in Hollow Creek. She worked as a waitress at a roadside diner during the day and helped care for her aging mother at night. She was not wealthy, not powerful, and not politically connected, but she was widely known, admired for her quiet confidence, independence, and refusal to belong to any one man. That independence would prove dangerous. By 1983, Ellie had drawn the attention of 3 interlinked families whose histories in Hollow Creek stretched back more than 50 years. The first was the Harlan family, led by Robert Harlan, 34, a married father of 2 and foreman at a local coal operation. The Harlans were known for controlling land and jobs. Refusing a Harlan was considered a personal insult. The second was the Maddox family, represented by Caleb Maddox, 29, recently returned from military service. Caleb was volatile, proud, and deeply sensitive to rejection. He believed Ellie owed him loyalty after a brief relationship that ended on her terms. The third was the I. Boone family, younger, poorer, and fiercely defensive. Evan Boone. Tew had grown up with Ellie and openly spoke of marrying her. His older brothers made it clear they would protect what was theirs. What began as competing romantic interests soon became something else entirely. By late 1984, Ellie had rejected all 3 men. She stopped socializing publicly. She changed work shifts. Friends later told investigators she felt watched, not by one man, but by entire families. Arguments broke out at the diner. Threats were exchanged in parking lots and church grounds. Men aligned themselves not just by blood, but by loyalty and resentment. Hollow Creek slowly divided into silent factions. No one contacted police. In Appalachia, disputes were often handled privately. And by the winter of 1985, the feud had already passed the point of return. By early 1985, Hollow Creek no longer felt like the same town Eleanor Walker had grown up in. Conversation stopped when she entered a room. Men she did not know began appearing near her home, parked along dirt roads for hours without explanation. What unsettled her most was not the attention itself, but the way it seemed organized. The families were no longer acting as individuals. Robert Harlan's influence extended quietly. His cousins controlled trucking routes. His brothers-in-law worked security at the mines. When Ellie refused his offers of protection, he did not argue. He simply withdrew his presence and replaced it with pressure. Her mother's medication deliveries were delayed. Her hours at the diner were suddenly cut. Nothing illegal, nothing provable. Caleb Maddox, meanwhile, became increasingly unpredictable. He was seen drinking heavily, telling friends that Ellie had ruined his life. He accused the Harlans of interfering and the Boones of plotting against him. On more than one occasion, witnesses reported seeing him armed, though no one called authorities. In Hollow Creek, calling the police on a Maddox was considered an act of provocation. The Boone brothers responded in kind. Evan Boone's older siblings began escorting Ellie to and from work without asking her permission. They positioned themselves outside her home at night, claiming they were keeping trouble away. Ellie later told a friend she felt trapped, protected by people who frightened her as much as those they claimed to defend her from. By February, the feud had spread beyond the original families. Uncles, cousins, and in-laws were pulled in. Old grievances resurfaced. Land disputes from the 1960s, unpaid debts, a bar fight from years earlier that had never been forgotten. Each incident was reinterpreted through the lens of the woman at the center of it all. Rumors circulated that someone intended to make an example, that the feud needed a decisive end. On the night of March 11, 1985, Several men were seen leaving town in separate vehicles, all heading toward the same stretch of forested back roads. No one could later agree on who initiated the meeting. Each family claimed the others had called it. What is certain is that by dawn, none of those men returned home. For 3 days, Hollow Creek waited. Wives assumed their husbands were avoiding trouble. Brothers believed silence meant negotiations were underway. And Eleanor Walker, unaware of the scale of what had been set in motion, packed a small bag and planned to leave town, a decision that came too late. When the first body was discovered on March 14th, the feud was no longer a rumor. It was a crime scene. The first body was found by a volunteer search party just after sunrise, deep in a ravine less than 5 miles from town. At first, responders believed it was an accident, a hunting mishap perhaps, or a man who had fallen while intoxicated. But as deputies widened the search area, a pattern emerged that erased any doubt. Over the next 2 days, 15 more bodies were located across a network of old logging paths and abandoned coal access roads. Some were hidden under brush. Others lay in shallow depressions, exposed to the cold night air. All were adult men. All were connected by blood or marriage to the Yasharlan, Maddox, or Boone families. Most disturbing to investigators was the consistency. Each victim bore the same distinct marks, evidence of a controlled, deliberate act rather than a chaotic confrontation. There were no signs of a large gunfight, no shell casings scattered across the terrain, no indication of panic. Whatever had happened in those woods had been methodical. Hollow Creek was placed under an informal lockdown. State police were called in within hours, followed by federal investigators who understood that this was no longer a local matter. 16 men did not vanish and reappeared dead without planning. As law enforcement canvassed the town, they encountered a wall of silence. Wives refused interviews. Parents claimed ignorance. Brothers provided conflicting timelines. Even those who had reported their relatives missing now avoided eye contact. The code of the mountains was clear. Speak carefully, or not at all. Eleanor Walker was taken into protective custody that same afternoon. She was questioned for nearly 8 hours. Calm but visibly shaken, she denied encouraging violence and insisted she had been trying to leave Hollow Creek altogether. Investigators noted that she never once asked for the names of the dead. She already knew who they would be. As autopsies were conducted, another detail surfaced, one that shifted the investigation entirely. The men had not been killed at 16 separate locations. They had been brought there afterward. Evidence suggested a single point of confrontation somewhere deeper in the mountains, a place known only to locals. A location tied not to business or hunting, but to family meetings, feuds, and old resolutions. What had occurred was not a spontaneous eruption of violence. It was an execution born from loyalty, resentment, and the belief that the law did not belong in Hollow Creek, and the people responsible were still there. Investigators focused their attention on a secluded clearing known locally as Pine Hollow, a place used for private gatherings long before Hollow Creek had paved roads or formal property lines. It was there, according to soil disturbances and tire impressions, that the confrontation had begun. What emerged from the investigation was not the story of a single killer, but of a coordinated decision. Witness statements, anonymous and carefully worded, suggested that representatives from the 3 families had agreed to meet under the pretense of ending the dispute. Each side arrived believing negotiations were possible. Each arrived armed, not for attack, but for insurance, as one local later described it. The turning point came shortly after midnight. An argument broke out over Eleanor Walker's future, who she would leave town with, who had the right to claim betrayal, who had been disrespected. Voices rose. Old accusations resurfaced. At some point, one man attempted to leave. Another blocked his path. What followed was not chaos, but alignment. Family members chose sides instinctively. Brothers stood with brothers. Cousins closed ranks. When the first act of violence occurred, no one stepped back. Instead, others joined in, not out of rage, but out of obligation. By the time the confrontation ended, 16 men were dead. No one called for help. The surviving participants did not flee. Instead, they worked together through the remaining hours of darkness, moving bodies away from Pine Hollow to delay discovery and obscure responsibility. Trucks were driven. Tools were shared. Silence was agreed upon without being spoken. At dawn, they returned home and resumed their lives. For weeks, investigators struggled to break that silence. Physical evidence placed multiple suspects at Pine Hollow, but no single individual could be tied directly to all deaths. Alibis overlapped just enough. Statements contradicted one another in small, strategic ways. Then, in June of 1985, the first crack appeared. A Boone cousin, facing unrelated charges, agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. His testimony confirmed what investigators already suspected. The killings were the result of a collective action, sanctioned by family elders who believed they were restoring balance. Arrests followed, slowly, carefully. Not everyone responsible would ever face trial. Some evidence had been lost. Some witnesses recanted. Others died before charges could be filed. But the truth was finally spoken aloud. And in Hollow Creek, that was considered the deepest betrayal of all. The arrests shook Hollow Creek in ways the killings themselves had not. When state police returned with warrants in the summer of 1985, they did so quietly, spreading them out over several weeks to avoid retaliation. Men were taken from their homes at dawn. Others were stopped on rural highways and escorted away without explanation. In total, 9 individuals were formally charged, a mix of fathers, sons, and cousins from all 3 families. The charges varied: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of murder. Prosecutors understood the limitations of their case. With so many participants and so little direct evidence, they aimed not for perfection, but for accountability. The trials were moved out of county. Too many jurors in the region were connected by blood or history. Proceedings were relocated to a neighboring district, where Hollow Creek's unwritten rules held less power. Even there, fear followed the case. Anonymous letters were sent to court staff. One witness withdrew testimony days before taking the stand. Eleanor Walker testified only once. At escalated, age 31, she appeared composed, dressed plainly, and avoided eye contact with the gallery. She described years of pressure, of being treated not as a person, but as a possession, something to be negotiated between men who barely acknowledged her presence. When asked if she believed the killings were done for her, she paused before answering. "No," she said. "They were done for themselves." That statement would become central to the prosecution's argument. The defense portrayed the events as a tragic accident, a fight that spiraled beyond control. Prosecutors countered with evidence of planning, coordination, and cleanup. They emphasized that the killings continued even after it was clear no one was acting in self-defense. In 1986, verdicts were delivered. 4 men were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms. 3 were acquitted due to insufficient evidence. 2 cases ended without verdicts, stalled by missing witnesses and procedural challenges. No one was ever convicted for all 16 deaths. For Hollow Creek, the legal outcome mattered less than the social one. Families stopped speaking. Church attendance dropped. Children grew up with last names that closed doors rather than opened them. The town never regained its sense of shared identity. Eleanor Walker left Appalachia that same year. She never returned. Today, Pine Hollow has no marker, no sign, no official acknowledgement. Just trees, dirt, and silence, holding the memory of a night when family loyalty outweighed law, and a quiet town learned how far it was willing to go to protect its own. Years passed, but the consequences of that night in March 1985 did not fade. Instead, they settled into Hollow Creek like a permanent fog, unspoken, but always present. Families of the convicted men maintained their innocence publicly, even as private divisions deepened. Wives raised children alone. Parents died without seeing their sons released. Younger relatives learned early which names to avoid saying out loud. In school, teachers noticed that certain children never sat near each other. Old friendships dissolved without explanation. Law enforcement officially closed the case in 1989. The final report concluded that the killings were the result of a multi-party confrontation rooted in long-standing familial conflict, a phrase that satisfied legal requirements but explained nothing emotionally. Investigators privately acknowledged that the full truth would never be known, not because it was impossible to uncover, but because too many people had agreed, consciously or not, to forget. Eleanor Walker built a life far from Appalachia. Records show she settled in the Midwest, married briefly, then divorced. She worked quietly, changed her last name, and avoided interviews. When a journalist attempted to contact her in the late 1990s, she declined with a single sentence. That story already took enough lives. Her perspective remained consistent to the end. Those men, she believed, had not died because of love, but because of pride. Because family honor had been mistaken for ownership, and silence had been mistaken for strength. In Hollow Creek, Pine Hollow slowly reclaimed itself. Tire tracks disappeared. The ground leveled. New trees grew. To an outsider, it became just another patch of forest. To locals, it was a boundary, a place no one visited and no one explained. Even decades later, older residents lowered their voices when the feud was mentioned. Some claimed the violence prevented worse bloodshed in the future. Others argued it proved that isolation breeds its own form of lawlessness. Most simply said nothing at all. What remained undeniable was this: 16 men left their homes one night, believing family would protect them. By morning, that same loyalty had sealed their fate, and in the quiet that followed, an entire town learned that some feuds do not end with justice, only with absence. By the early 1990s, Hollow Creek had changed in ways that statistics could not capture. The population declined. Young people left as soon as they were able. Businesses closed quietly, one by one, until the town existed more as a memory than a destination. Those who stayed carried the weight differently. Some framed the events of 1985 as an unavoidable eruption, a collision of pride, isolation, and tradition in a place where disputes had always been settled privately. Others saw it as a warning that went unheeded for decades. When communities value loyalty over accountability, violence finds room to grow. Former law enforcement officials involved in the case later admitted that the investigation had tested the limits of the justice system, not because evidence was absent, but because responsibility was shared. When everyone is involved, no one stands alone long enough to be fully held accountable. The families themselves never reconciled. Graves were visited separately. Weddings were planned to avoid overlap. Funerals were scheduled with quiet negotiations behind closed doors. Even in death, the divisions held. Occasionally, an outsider would ask about the story. A reporter, a researcher, someone passing through who noticed how quickly conversations stopped when Pine Hollow was mentioned. Locals would respond with vague answers or polite deflection. "That was a long time ago," they would say. Or, "You wouldn't understand." In truth, many of them did understand all too well. The feud was not remembered for its brutality, but for its permanence. It became part of the town's identity. Not something discussed, but something lived around. A lesson passed down without words. By the time the new century approached, Hollow Creek no longer resembled the place it had been before the feud. The quiet remained, but it was a different kind of quiet, one shaped by loss rather than peace. And for those who knew the full story, one fact remained impossible to escape. The tragedy did not begin the night 16 men died. It began years earlier, when a community decided that silence was safer than intervention, and that family loyalty mattered more than restraint. That decision, more than any single act of violence, defined what followed. In the end, the story of Hollow Creek was never truly about one woman, one night, or even 16 deaths. It was about a system of belief, one that had existed long before 1985 and quietly shaped every decision that followed. In Appalachia, family names carried history like inheritance. They dictated where you worked, who you trusted, and how disputes were settled. The feud exposed what happened when those bonds hardened into something inflexible, where compromise was seen as weakness and outside authority as intrusion. Investigators who revisited the case years later reached a sobering conclusion. Had even one person stepped back, one father, one brother, one cousin, the outcome might have been different. But in a moment where loyalty was expected, restraint felt like betrayal. Eleanor Walker was often remembered incorrectly by those outside the region. Some portrayed her as the cause. Others cast her as a symbol. In reality, she was neither. She was a reminder of how easily a community can strip a person of agency and turn them into a justification for its own conflicts. The 16 men who died were not nameless figures in a statistic. They were sons, husbands, and fathers who believed they were defending something sacred. What they defended in the end was an idea, one that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Hollow Creek still exists, though few maps mark it clearly. Its roads remain narrow, its houses spread far apart, its forests thick and quiet. Visitors pass through without realizing what happened there, unaware that beneath the calm lies a history shaped by choices made in silence. For those who lived through it, the lesson was never written down or formally taught. It was absorbed slowly, through absence and avoidance, that when loyalty replaces accountability, when silence replaces intervention, and when pride replaces reason, even the quietest place can become the setting for tragedy. And once that line is crossed, there is no returning to what existed before. If you want more documentary-style true crime stories like this, forgotten cases, historical context, and real consequences, follow the channel now. Activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next investigation. And leave a like to help this story reach more people. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?